And you're telling me you don't think it's in your best interest to know what someone wants out of you ahead of time? Surely, Kamala destroys him for this. All right, everyone's in their seats. Class has started. So, let's get into today's lesson. We'll start by asking a question. If you saw this tweet and their response to being called out, what would you say? It's come to my attention that an increasing number of you would respond, he's right, he didn't say that. For that reason, the topic today will be subtext. People often speak figuratively. People even misspeak from time to time. Because of that, the words people use are not always accurate representations of what they intend to say. That intended message is what we call subtext. So, today we're going to practice inferring that intent by watching the recent debate between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris.
When it comes to the economy, do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago?
David Muir opens the debate by asking Kamala Harris if she believes Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago, and prefaces that question by stating that voters indicate it is their most pressing concern going into the election. Let's see how the vice president responds.
So I was raised as a middle-class kid, and I am actually the only person on this stage who has a plan that is about lifting up the middle class and working people of America.
Kamala responds by stating she's the only candidate with the plan. Now, we're not going to acknowledge anything that happens after this, and let me explain why. Kamala has indicated with her initial response that she does not intend to answer the question. This means that whatever follows, regardless of any presumed validity, is not being said for the sake of argument. It's to further her intention to avoid answering the question. As an audience or an opponent, we need to be able to recognize that her goal is to get us to engage with this distraction precisely so she can avoid answering the question. When a person does this, it's important to revert the discussion to the issue at hand. One way to do this is through something that may be seen as a straw man argument. It's not, and I'll explain why after I present the argument. If you're Donald Trump here, first, you declare that your position is that the economy is weak. After that, you point out that Kamala's response seems to indicate she agrees with that position and that any further avoidance of the question will serve to affirm that as the case. This pins her down. She can no longer afford to dodge the question because that would affirm your assertion that she avoided the question for the reason you stated. This is not a straw man argument because we do not intend to argue against the claim that the economy is weak. In fact, we clearly stated that to be the position we intend to take. Kamala, in this scenario, would be forced to affirm her actual position, which, in a good faith debate, should be the goal. If Kamala denies that the economy is poor, you are prepared to argue against that because your position is that it's weak. If she affirms that the economy is weak, she's not only implicated as a cause for that weakness due to the context of the question, the last 4 years, but she also affirms she approached the topic with dishonesty, undermining her credibility from the moment she opened her mouth. This is why tactics of manipulation are not what people tend to believe they are. They are not debate tactics. Debate is a presentation of logic, and these tactics are not logical. They appeal to our System 1 way of thinking that is primarily driven by our biases and preconceptions. Debate is a contest of our System 2 way of thinking that requires reasoning and rationality. Using illogical arguments that appeal to System 1 show unpreparedness at best and the intention to deceive at worst. No matter where she falls on that spectrum, she undermines her credibility in the debate if her opponent can properly demonstrate the flaw in her reasoning. That said, let's see how Trump responds.
First of all, I have no sales tax. That's an incorrect statement. She knows that.
We're screwed, aren't we? All right. It's clear we aren't going to get a proper debate out of either of these two. So let's pretend that pretext doesn't exist and focus on the arguments presented, regardless of their merit. I want y'all to remember, though, when the intent is to avoid taking a position on an issue, anything said to further that goal needs to be disregarded. True, false, lie, fantasy, it doesn't even matter whether or not they believe it. They aren't saying it because it's what they think or believe. It's because they don't want you to know what they actually think or believe. At this point, we're basically just humoring them. When you're treating the words of potential leaders of a country like they're coming from a child, it's probably time to be a bit concerned.
Number one, I have nothing to do, as you know, and as she knows better than anyone, I have nothing to do with Project 2025. That's out there. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it.
No. You have to read it. It's a list of goals of the people you are likely going to be working with. This is not something you should feign ignorance about. You're supposed to be the deal maker, and you're telling me you don't think it's in your best interest to know what someone wants out of you ahead of time? Surely, Kamala destroys him for this.
So, Donald Trump has no plan for you.
Are you freaking kidding me? First, Donald Trump has a dangerous Project 2025 plan. Now, Donald Trump doesn't have a plan? I take it back. Your inability to present an argument that can't be used to demonstrate your dishonest intentions is a talent. It's friggin' terrifying that so many people seem incapable of seeing through this. We've gotten way off the topic of subtext, haven't we?
Scholar. Every Democrat, every Republican, liberal, conservative, they all wanted this issue to be brought back to the states where the people could vote.
The problem is that people aren't voting on it. What was it you said a little while ago?
I believe in the exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. I believe strongly in it. Ronald Reagan did also. 85% of Republicans do.
If 85% of Republicans believed in those exceptions and the people, that 85%, were voting on it, no state would have enacted those bans without those exceptions. The people aren't voting on it. State legislatures that run virtually unopposed and in some cases entirely unopposed are voting on it. That's why states' rights arguments are almost always made at the expense of individual rights. Voting, guns, abortion, frickin' slavery. The state is the most effective authority at overturning individual rights because individual voters generally have no idea who the legislators casting votes in favor of overturning them are in the first place.
And I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there.
This is one of the clips everyone saw of how Kamala owned Trump by baiting him into defending his rallies. But I would like now to ask the class to put on their critical thinking caps for a minute as we listen to David Muir's question for Trump between this supposed owning and taking of the bait.
President Trump, on that point, I want to get your response.
Well, I would like to respond.
Let me just ask, though, why did you try to kill that bill, and successfully so, that would have put thousands of additional agents and officers on the border?
Trump was asked why he killed a bipartisan border bill, a question that, regardless of how he answered, would have demonstrated that he put his self-interest above the most important issues for Republican voters, immigration and the safety of our country. Now, if you're Trump, would it be best for you to A, answer that no-win question, or B, respond to a petty accusation from your opponent? Kamala gave him an out on a question that put his candidacy to risk. So now I ask you, class, who did Kamala actually own here? Trump or herself?
They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame.
Another hot clip, but once again, let's focus on the intent. The initial story was that Haitian immigrants were eating pets in Springfield, Ohio. We can reasonably infer the original intent of the story was to stoke racism toward Haitian immigrants because the evidence they used were photographs of people who were not even Haitian. There's no reason to even bring up Haitians if the intent is not dependent on them. So, is that also Trump's intent? Well, let's listen to what he says a little bit later.
ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just say here, this is
the people on television say my dog was taken and used for food.
Now, I've never known Trump not to take an opportunity to accuse a reporter of fake news to their face. I know it might be hard to believe, but he genuinely seems surprised to hear this. He even brings up where he heard it. That shows his belief is being challenged. He's weighing David Muir's words against the words of the people he heard it from. He even says, and Trump never says. I cannot believe I'm saying this, but I think his intent wasn't to fearmonger. It was to warn people of something he genuinely thought was happening. Don't get me wrong. The fact that a former and potential future president of the United States genuinely believed that story is horrifying. It's horribly misguided, but it's not unreasonable to think he presented this in good faith because they were on the topic of immigration and the context shows he believed that to be true.
And let's be clear.
Okay, Obama.
Where each person stands on the issue of what is important about respect for the rule of law and respect for law enforcement. The former vice president called for defunding federal law enforcement, 45,000 agents, get this, on the day after he was arraigned on 34 felony counts. All
right, now that we got some practice inferring intent, what do you think Kamala is saying here that she didn't put into words? What is the subtext? She's not bringing up the trials and his call to defund law enforcement for no reason. A literal interpretation would be that she's saying he's a felon and wants to defund law enforcement, which would open the door to debating the efficacy of the trial, which she absolutely does not want to do. So, she made the subtext very clear for us. Donald Trump does not respect the law. She opened by saying we should be clear about who respects law and law enforcement. She never once said Donald Trump does not, but she laid out evidence that he doesn't. If you're one of the people that said, but he didn't say that at the beginning of class, and were able to see the subtext because it was just as clear before, you've learned quite a lot so far, haven't you? Perhaps enough to, press that black subscribe button and that thumbs up icon.
People should never be thinking about an election as fraudulent.
Bruh.
Our elections are bad. And a lot of these illegal immigrants coming in, they're trying to get them to vote. They can't even speak English. They don't even know what country they're in practically. And these people are trying to get them to vote. And that's why they're allowing them to come into our country.
So, what's the subtext here? 2020 was stolen. Our elections are bad. They're trying to get illegal immigrants to vote. If you're Kamala Harris, picking out the subtext could really put Trump on the spot. Do you know what it is? He's saying that Democrats cheated by getting millions of immigrants to vote. Now, I'm not going to try and convince you the election wasn't stolen, but rationally speaking, assuming the election was stolen, could illegal immigrants voting have been the cause? Could the Democrats have secretly organized millions of illegal immigrants to cast fraudulent votes without getting caught? With the immense amount of scrutiny the elections faced, Do you believe it is at all possible that something so easily verifiable, whether or not a vote was cast by a citizen, would have gone unnoticed? All right, Kamala, this is your moment. Tell Trump to go on Fox News tonight and show his evidence that illegal immigrants voted by the millions in the election to overturn the results. This is the moment for you to prove to Trump that his reason for saying the election was stolen is false. All you have to do is say, you did not win because of votes from illegal immigrants. What will you say?
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people.
Oh, come on, fired by 81 million people. He just said millions of those people were immigrants that couldn't legally vote. As good of a soundbite as that is, it does nothing to dismiss the claim that those votes were cast illegally. If anything, it gives legitimacy, because 81 million sounds like a lie in the face of Trump saying he got 11 million more votes than he should have to win the election with his 74 million. Trump, the election was stolen because the numbers were too big. Harris, actually, they were bigger. There is a clear issue to tackle here, and you've just made everyone who thinks the election might have been stolen sure it was. You want to talk about Harris baiting Trump with crowd sizes? Nah, man, Trump baited Kamala with the popular vote.
That if he weren't in that debate, he'd be running instead of her. She got no votes. He got 14 million votes. What you did, you talk about a threat to democracy. He got 14 million votes, and they threw him out of office.
So the subtext here is that Kamala shouldn't be the nominee and that the Democrats cheated. This is easy enough because it's a really popular sentiment with Republicans right now that's being used to argue that they also stole 2020. This is a pretty good example of how we can use circumstantial context around the statement to infer its meaning. That's all well and good, but I want to address a major problem with this. If either of the assassination attempts on Trump had succeeded, would the Republicans not be able to put forth another candidate because he's the one they voted for? If something were to happen to you, because you and other Republicans have harped on this rules for thee crap, it'd prove you don't actually care that the Democrats subverted the vote. If you don't care the Democrats subverted the vote, it stands to reason that you don't care if the 2020 election was subverted either. In fact, it shows the minute things don't go your way, you won't hesitate to subvert the vote yourself, which is what you are already accused of doing by sending fake electors and trying to get Pence to not certify the results. Class, don't play with bad faith arguments. It's way too easy for them to blow up in your face, and I hope to God that doesn't end up being a pun. You know what? I think we've had enough practice. I think from now on we'll just use rapid fire translations of what's being said directly to the subtext, and I'll leave it to you in the comments to determine if my translations are correct.
President Harris, he says you hate Israel.
Vice President Harris, I am terrified you won't be able to respond to this correctly, so I am throwing you a softball to guarantee you make the proper response.
Do you believe it's in the U.S. best interest for Ukraine to win this war, yes or no?
I think it's the U.S. best interest to get this war finished and just get it done.
All right.
No, Ukraine's sovereignty isn't worth the war, and the war ends faster if we support Putin instead.
As commander-in-chief, if elected, how would you deal with Vladimir Putin, and would it be any different from what we're seeing from President Biden?
Well, first of all, it's important to remind the former president you're not running against Joe Biden, you're running against me.
You're basically running against Biden with a vagina and the ability of conscious thought, and David Muir is an idiot for expecting me to give a clear answer to that.
Putin would be sitting in Moscow, and he wouldn't have lost 300,000 men and women, but he would have been sitting in Moscow. Quiet, please. He would have been sitting in Moscow much happier than he is right now.
Putin would have taken Ukraine in a week, the same way he did Crimea if I had been president.
You said she went to negotiate with Vladimir Putin. Vice President Harris, have you ever met Vladimir Putin? Can you clarify tonight?
Yet again, I said it at the beginning of this debate, you're going to hear a bunch of lies coming from this fellow.
Neither of us moderators have any faith that you can do this on your own, so we're going to do this like we're your lawyers and you're on stand. Now, just like we rehearsed.
Ask the Vice President, do you believe you bear any responsibility in the way that withdrawal played out?
Well, I will tell you, I agreed with President Biden's decision. to pull out of Afghanistan.
You're basically running against Biden with a vagina and the ability of conscious thought, and David Muir is an idiot for expecting me to give a clear answer on that. Yes, of course I feel like it's my fault. I suck.
As president, invited them to Camp David because he does not again appreciate the role and responsibility of the President of the United States to be commander-in-chief with a level of respect.
President Trump, your response to her saying that you began the negotiations with the Taliban.
So if you take a look at that period of time, the Taliban was killing our soldiers, a lot of them, with snipers. And I got involved with the Taliban because the Taliban was doing the killing. That's the fighting force within Afghanistan. They don't bother doing that because, you know, they deal with the wrong people all the time. But I got involved. And Abdul is the head of the Taliban. He is still the head of the Taliban. And I told Abdul, don't do it anymore. You do it anymore, you're going to have problems. And he said, why do you send me a picture of my house? I said, you're going to have to figure that out, Abdul.
Democrats live in a fantasy world where bad guys stop being bad guys without being confronted, and confronting the bad guys makes you a bad guy too.
Why do you believe it's appropriate to weigh in on the racial identity of your opponent?
I don't, and I don't care. I don't care what she is. I don't care. You make a big deal out of something, I couldn't care less. Whatever she wants to be is okay with me.
Whoops, I was not supposed to say I don't think it's appropriate. Despite the arguments that are made about color blindness being racist, the truth is that most Americans, despite what you see on Twitter, prefer the colorblind stance. It doesn't matter if it's incorrect. Colorblindness will get me more votes, so that's the position I will take on this.
Vice President Harris, your thoughts on this?
I think it's, I mean, honestly, I think it's a tragedy that we have someone who wants to be president who has consistently, over the course of his career, attempted to use race to divide the American people. You know, I do believe that the vast majority of us know that we have so much more in common than what separates us, and we don't want this kind of approach that is just constantly trying to divide us, and especially by race.
Despite the arguments that are made about colorblindness being racist, the truth is that most Americans, despite what you see on Twitter, prefer the colorblind stance. It doesn't matter if that's incorrect. Colorblindness will get me more votes, so that's the position I will take on this.
This is the most divisive presidency in the history of our country. There's never been anything like it. They're destroying our country, and they come up with things like what she just said.
I say I want to make America great again, but I don't know anything about our history, and I have repeatedly proved that to you. Do y'all not know the meaning of the word again? Don't you think I should know the history if I'm going to make this great part of it happen again?
Clearly, I am not Joe Biden, and I am certainly not Donald Trump.
I'm basically Joe Biden with a...
And what I do offer is a new generation of leadership for our country. One who believes in what is possible, one who brings a sense of optimism about what we can do instead of always disparaging the American people.
I want people to be content fantasizing about their ideal country because ain't no shot I'm going to be the one to make it a reality.
Yes or no, you still do not have a plan?
I have concepts of a plan.
Remember when Kellyanne Conway said alternative facts?
What would you do to fight climate change?
As vice president over the last 4 years, we have invested $1 trillion in a clean energy economy, while we have also increased domestic gas production to historic levels. We have created over 800,000 new manufacturing jobs while I have been vice president. We have invested in clean energy to the point that we are opening up factories around the world.
Listen here, I'm like an oil company. If all I have to do to keep polluting the environment is pretend to care about it, that's exactly what I'll do.
So I think you've heard tonight two very different visions for our country. One that is focused on the future, and the other that is focused on the past, and an attempt to take us backward.
So she just started by saying she's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border. They've had 3.5 years to create jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it?
We both know that the only thing that's important for this election is making you believe the president matters more than they actually do. We want you to give credit for everything good and bad in this country that happens to the president instead of the actual policymakers in Congress and the lobbyists that keep those congressmen in the pockets of big businesses. We want you to be distracted by manufactured social issues we have no intention or even a way of solving. Put all your focus on the presidential election. Don't look behind the curtain. Okay, class. Hopefully today you've learned a thing or two about how to recognize the subtext of a statement. However, there's one commonality that's shared in every intended message. Do you know what that is? You can buy the truth. You've just got to pay attention. Thanks for watching.